Good morning. Welcome to today's Environmental Professional Network Breakfast program. My name's Tim Haab. I'm the interim director of the Ohio State School for Environment and Natural Resources. Greetings to everybody joining us remotely on YouTube. We're excited to host you virtually. To see an outline for this morning's program, please refer to the agenda located in the program on your brochure. The brochure is on your table. To be mindful of our material waste output, we printed enough brochures for you to share together at your tables in a digital brochure that you can reference on your own devices throughout the day. Take a picture of the QR code featured on the table. This will bring up a digital brochure that you're welcome to reference throughout the day on your mobile device. The brochure contains today's agenda as well as professional bios for the speakers who are going to be presenting to us this morning. This breakfast is designed by the university as an official zero waste event, designated, sorry. So please pay attention to the signage posted in the hallway and around the room, in particular over this side of the room, where you can compost any remaining food items on your plate, as well as sort out materials destined for the landfill or recycling when our event concludes. Additional instructions will be provided at the end of our program for returning your Buckeye Scarlet colored reusable plates, bowls, cups, and cutlery items. These reusable items, distinguished by their red color, improves our efforts to create zero waste breakfast events. For those currently viewing on YouTube, Molly Bean's placing a link in the program brochure in the chat, to the program brochure in the chat. Please feel free to utilize the chat function in YouTube to post your comments, thoughts, and questions throughout the program. Our team will be fielding questions posted there and those from the in-person audience to our speakers around 9:15 a.m. this morning. In addition, take a look at the back of your program brochure to see a list of individuals and organizations who chose to sponsor a student for today's EPN events. Thanks to our sponsors who help us to make these programs affordable and accessible to students each month. We're grateful to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife, who has been an organizational monthly sponsor for our EPN program this year. I know we're very fortunate to be joined by several members of the division today. A special thanks to the Ohio State's Translational Data Analytics Institute, known as TDAI, who are our first-time EPN sponsor today, and we hope it's not the last. I know our team has greatly enjoyed today's collaboration with Dr. Tanya Berger-Wolf, Director of TDAI. Tanya, we're so appreciative of your Institute's support, which helped us bring both Sarah Beery here from MIT and Sarah Supp's team from nearby Denison to be part of the educational session occurring here later today. For those of you who are not yet aware, this is a very busy week in the world of data analytics because we're now officially into day 2 of the International Love Data Week. At research institutions across the world, events celebrating all things data to bring people together to share their data, experiences, and learn data visualization best practices, all while having fun during the process are being organized. We're grateful to Diana Bograt, who is the program director of the Imaginomics Institute, and with the AI and Biodiversity Change Global Climate Center, as well as Jenny Grabmeyer with TDAI, who are both key members of our event planning team. And very importantly, they made us aware of this international holiday. Well, I do think it's important that we disclose that the founder and home of Love Data Week appears to be the Institute for Social Research, which unfortunately is located at the University of Michigan. In the spirit of Valentine's Day, let's recognize how we all benefit together when data is more effectively processed, visualized, and communicated for the betterment of our world. Ohio State University Library System has a list of Love Data-related programs featured on their website. So for those of you who might have a data science enthusiast as a partner, family friend, or family member, please consider exploring through the website later today if you're looking for Valentine's data over data ideas. Speaking of international and national level connections, we believe Todd Wilkinson, a nationally known award-winning American journalist who documents animal migrations, including through the Rocky Mountains, is with us on the YouTube live stream. If you were able to join us, Todd, welcome, and we appreciate you being here at what's 6:15 Mountain Time. Todd joined us in 2016 via the EPN, alongside photographer and co-author Thomas Mangelson. They were in Columbus addressing their work on Jackson Hole's grizzly numbered 399, a famous mother bear who I know left a powerful impact on our community and hundreds of thousands of wildlife enthusiasts across the world. Former EPN coordinator David Hanselman, who many of you know and have connected with in the hallway earlier this morning, made us aware of Thomas's newest film that builds upon his previous grizzly bear documentation. You can connect with David after today's event to learn more. One final note on today's attendance guest list, we have several students who made the commute to join us in person from Ohio Wesleyan University and Denison University. We're happy to have you here, and we welcome you all to today's educational sessions. So now let's start today's program. You can learn more about Dr. Gil Bohrer's work in his professional bio, which is in the program brochure alongside each of today's speakers. About 1 year ago, Joe and Kalia were informed about the Room to Roam project by Molly Bean, who had read an article about the work. They were immediately impressed and captivated by the story, the collaboration and the context for the project and its partnership teams. They reached out to Dr. Gil Bohrer to learn more, and here we are today. Gil has been so helpful in creating this event, making time over the past 12 months in his very busy schedule to help us arrange the program. He deserves major credit for identifying and recruiting our incredible panel of speakers who are joining us from as far away as Alberta, Canada, and North Carolina. Gil, thanks again for your work to make today's event possible. We look forward to learning more about Room to Roam. Please, everyone, welcome up Dr. Gil Bohrer.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here so early in the morning. So let's start at the beginning. From the beginning, humanity has been captivated by animal movement and by the need to manage it, really going all the way to the beginning. But now we live in a technological world encapsulated in the most existential of famous questions: why did the elk cross the road? And with this technological era comes new challenges at managing animal movement, which include fragmentation, habitat loss, disturbance, species invasion, and other things that need to be addressed beyond the regular ecology of migrating animals. But technology also brings advances that makes animal managers and animal movement researchers' life easier. And we will, in this panel, we will show you a lot of work that we are doing with these GPS tags that you see here, the mother caribou and cub wearing. Every GPS tagged animal has a constellation of satellites observing everywhere it goes, report another constellation of satellites communicating with the tag, letting the scientists know, most cases live, where the animal is currently. And further developing tag technology allows minimization of tags, and by now it is possible to tag almost everything. Not everything, some animals are still too small, and there are limitations of power and duty cycles and extent of time you can deploy a tag on a given animal. But there are tag-enabled animal movement studies on many, many, many different species in all parts of the world. And these days, tags measure more than the animal location. Some tags record conditions of the animal itself, body temperature, heart rate, brain activity. Some tags measure environmental conditions like air temperature, salinity for marine mammals, depth, elevation, air pressure, humidity, what have you not. Tags are continuously developing and more advances are happening. And that all turned animal movement from a very data-poor science that had very few individually monitored animals whose track been recorded to an extraordinarily data-rich science where millions of data points are streaming live to large databases. And in the later part of today, you will hear from Sarah Supp and Sarah Beery about using AI to analyze animal observations and crowdsourcing of animal location data. So now that we know so much about where the animals are going, we can see all over the globe where animals are moving, and this video was produced by Movebank, which is a German database run by a group at the Max Planck Institute, which our project is collaborating with. And they collapse many different years of movement to like one kind of climatological season of animal movement with all the public data, and this is just a fraction of the data on the data set. These are all the public data sets, and you can see animal moves everywhere in the world. And the same, not the same satellite, but the same space revolution that allows us so much information about animal movement is giving us a lot of information about so many other things on Earth. So, for example, NASA, so few cool things. NASA and other satellite space agencies can tell you about Earth. Here are ocean currents, for example. We can know at every minute where the currents are going. If you want to track a sea turtle or a whale, this is a very important information. There are very cool, easily used interfaces where NASA is letting you query all the data that they have, so you can request whatever you want. You see here a picture of NDVI, which is vegetation greenness, which is typically the most used data set of Earth observation. They can tell you things about soil moisture and other environmental limitation, precipitation. There is data about human activity. This is the famous night light product. So in the massively populated area, the night light are proportional to population density. In the less populated areas, such as North Dakota, night lights are proportional to oil exploration activities and other human activities that produce a lot of light. They can tell us things about events on Earth, pollution events, algal bloom events, fire, and this is a live data set of fire. Well, it's not live now, it's old fires, but there's a live version of it. You can look what fires are running now. And here's an example from now, what space agencies are doing, they are merging forces. So there are large weather models that are running, fed by space data and fed by Earth observation of climate, to give you a by-the-hour pixelated view of all the climatic variables on Earth. So obviously, even with all our advances, we don't observe everything everywhere all the time, but we can model it. So those large model reanalyses are constantly tweaked by observed data and are trying to get as close as possible to the actual conditions as now, and then they let them run in the future. This is where your weather forecast is coming from. Versions of the same model are running 100 years for the future and telling us stuff about the future. Now the question is, with us knowing so much about animal movement and so much about the world, can we do better in bringing those two information streams together? Can we utilize our knowledge of what's happening in the world to improve our understanding of where the animals are going and why they cross the road? So about 15 years ago, Roland and Sarah and I started one of the new data products, interfaces, systems. What do we call that as a category of things? What is ENV data? Service. An online service that we call ENV data, that if you had a tagged animal data set, you could go to our service. There is some GUIs, some selection, which data set you want, what area you want to zoom on, which animal you want to annotate, and that will actually go online to the proper agencies, request the data, because they don't have it live. It's large data set, they need to pull it. Request the data, send it to you, process it, and interpolate it to the animal location. That service, it's called ENV data. It's now part of Movebank. It is very heavily used, but we are moving to the next step beyond that. There are more things that we want to know about animals, and there are even more creative and more elaborate ways that we can utilize remote sensing and reanalysis, weather reanalysis data when studying animal movement. So the Room to Roam project is a NASA-funded initiative. NASA wants everyone in the world to use their data, makes them feel less earmarked and more useful. And us as the animal movement community say, okay, we have a use case. We really need your data, but your data is very hard to use. So we partnered up with a large group of state agencies and AGOs for the Yukon to Yellowstone International Migration Corridor. We a little bit expanded it from the Yukon to the Northwest Territories. And we have scientists studying animal movement, and through our project collaborating across agencies to exchange information about animal movement. And we are building tools that will make the interpretation of that animal movement data more easy by the agencies that really need to use it. So for the panel of today, we'll have Jodi Hilty, which is from the Yukon to Yellowstone, which we refer to as Y2Y Conservation Initiative. It's an NGO. She's the president and chief scientist of that. She's one of our major, what we call data users. She's using animal movement data. She needs to run our tools to get the analysis. And she's helping us identify who else is collaborating in that space and what are the large-scale needs of conservation within that very large international migration corridor. We have Sarah Davidson, who is the curator of Movebank, and Sarah will show you the new tools we are making, and we have Roland from the North Carolina State University and Natural Science Museum, which I usually put first. And Roland will show you further advances into other types of animal tracking beyond GPS tags and so on. So thank you, and Sarah. Jodi.
Any second.
Hey, Jodi, you're on my screen, but not the big screen. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I'm going to share a few slides, and what my job is going to be around framing this incredible region where this work is happening. All right, so I'm just going to put this into share mode. If you cannot see this, I hope someone can tell me that they can't. So as a wildlife corridor ecologist, or somebody who studied animal movements for so long, this effort is really, really cool. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me. So I live in Alberta, and this is a map of indigenous people. So we think of the Yellowstone to Yukon region as being two countries, but it's also crisscrosses 75 indigenous territories, 5 states, 2 provinces, and 2 territories. And why do I say this? This is because animals don't recognize our human boundaries. They're always moving all across it. And this place, the Yellowstone to Yukon region, is the place where we still have all of the large carnivores and all of the large hooved animals. And the thing is that if we don't do something about it, if we don't know where these animals need to get their resources, we could lose them all. It's actually a global gem. It turns out this is the wildest large mountain region left in the world. So the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, the organization I work with, it connects and protects habitat from Yellowstone to Yukon so that people and nature can thrive. So it's about a 2,000-mile long region. And the way that we work with more than 700 different collaborators is through an evidence-based approach. So what's the best information telling us to do with really scarce conservation dollars? And we essentially work locally, regionally, nationally, and even globally, setting enabling policies. Let's get to the story of the Yellowstone to Yukon region. So starting in the early 90s, there were a number of changes in the way that we could do science. And one of them was the advent of satellite and GPS collars. So this wolf, Pluie the wolf, was collared just south of Banff National Park. And she made 100,000 square kilometer jaunt. That's about 10 times larger than Yellowstone National Park. And we wouldn't have been able to track this in the past, but what she showed us is that while protected areas are important, they're actually not sufficient for conserving animals that move at a scale like hers. We can also look at grizzly bear distribution. There were some references to grizzly bears earlier, and they used to be all the way down into Mexico. By the 1920s, there were these little tiny pockets of populations in the United States, all of which went extinct except for that one red dot called, which is Yellowstone. Park right here. And you can actually see where the Y2Y region is going north, because this is the only place where grizzly bears in North America are left. We can also talk about climate change. Well, the Y2Y region is a north-south region, and so animals can move from north to south and south to north. They can move up in elevation, they can move to different slopes and different aspects. And scientists tell us that what we're doing, expanding protected areas, connecting them, and reducing stressors, will help us to maintain this ecosystem all over the long term. And I won't ask where you fall on this very complicated graph in Ohio. So how do we actually go about keeping things connected? So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So one, we already talked about this, but the best available science and knowledge is really, really important, because 2,000 miles is a huge length of area, and we really have to put our resources in the right place. So where is that? We depend on science to tell us. And then second, we talked about how our organization works with 700 different partners. It's all about collaboration, right? And working together on shared solutions. So what do we have to get done? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to protect the right places, right? So in the Y2Y region in 1993, there were about 11% of the landscape was protected. Today, it's about 18%, and we're heading towards 30% by 2030 on the way to what nature needs. It turns out in these sensitive ecosystems, it might be even bigger than that. So where are we today? So we've increased protected areas by about 80%. We've got these Peel, the Peace, and the Katmai are 3 new agreed upon by the federal government, the regional governments, and in this case, Indigenous peoples, because that's how conservation is happening in Canada. So we have about 14 million new acres that are committed. And then there's proposals for about another 35 million acres of Indigenous-led protected areas in Canada. And that would get us actually to 30 by 30 if we were to say, okay, all of those are going to be approved. So protected areas are really flying forward in, I think, some really good ways, and in some important habitats that haven't yet been protected. But we know that animals like pluie, as well as many hooved animals and birds, fly well beyond protected areas. So a second ingredient is identifying those key areas for connectivity of wildlife, or ecological corridors. So in my backyard, my daughter calls this Mom's Traffic Jam. This is a new set of wildlife overpasses. So ultimately, the animals will walk over this on a land bridge to get across the Trans-Canada Highway. In addition to actual roads being barriers, sometimes private lands are really important. So let's say, in this case, on either side of where this bridge is going, these are public lands. But if they were private lands, you obviously wouldn't want to put a wildlife crossing structure there without ensuring that those private lands weren't going to become a mine or a housing development or something like that. So securing private lands in a voluntary way is really important. So, in our work so far, we've contributed to about 500,000 acres of private land conservation with land trust partners, putting those lands into easement so that so often cash poor landowners can receive cash and can continue ranching. And then with wildlife crossing structures, what's really exciting is this number is no longer 117 wildlife crossing structures, but it's actually 129. So we are rapidly moving towards normalization of safe wildlife passage. And over here on the right, you can actually see what a wildlife crossing structure looks like. Joe, am I okay? Yeah, okay. So do these structures actually work? This is an underpass in Banff National Park, one of the most well-studied set of crossing structures in the world. They have 38 underpasses and 6 overpasses, so some things to know about it. It reduces animal vehicle collisions by 80%, and for deer and ungulates, it's 96%. So some of the smaller critters can still get through the fencing. But it's also really interesting. So some animals have breakfast on one side and lunch on the other. Some animals just use it once. And for some animals, like grizzly bears, male bears might use an underpass like this, but females will only use overpasses. And so understanding these differences are really important if you want to have true connectivity of a population. Why is this so important? So again, I'll use a grizzly bear here. I'm placing you down in Montana. There's an interstate called I-90 that goes all the way across Montana, the biggest barrier in the Y2Y region in the United States. And these two different colors represent one bear during different seasons trying to cross the interstate. It bounced off 44 times before it finally found its way across safely. And so I'm really pleased to say that the state of Montana is now doing a study exactly where this animal is trying to cross to figure out how to mitigate that and get more underpasses and overpasses and the associated fencing that's needed. So again, sticking to the theme of grizzly bears, and we'll get to other animals soon, but this is a study that a researcher, Michael Proctor, did, looking at what was once a continuous bear population, so you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference in genes, but these little yellow blobs, if you will, are now distinguishably different genetically from their neighbors. And if you look even more closely, you can see that there are these roads kind of running along most of them, because where we have roads, we have associated development, and many animals try to stay away from there. So what do we do about that? Well, we asked these scientists, where are the most important areas for connectivity in the transboundary region? And they gave us Duck Lake, Kidd Creek, Highway 2, and this Bears to Bees section in here. And all 4 of those places have now been mitigated, meaning we've secured private lands, we've restored the lands, etc. And because of that, and because of some coexistence efforts and a few other efforts to secure habitat, we have seen a massive shift. So you can look at land that was purchased, corridors that were secured or restored, and even attractants. So we put electrified fences around chicken coops and orchards and things like that to keep bears out of trouble. And we went from 10 grizzly bears in the 1990s to about 60 today. We thought we'd get to 100, but now these bears are actually dispersing, which is pretty cool, which suggests that the habitat is getting more and more full. So that's an example of really restoring connectivity and restoring species as well as habitat. So now we're looking, so that was up here in the northwest corner of Idaho and Montana. Here's Yellowstone National Park. And now we're using different science to tell us where do we need to connect the Yellowstone population further north. So for grizzly bears and wolverines, this is possibly the most important piece. We know that we're very likely to lose those species over time unless we reconnect them. And this will also benefit a lot of other wildlife. And so what we've done is we've identified within there, where are the pinch points, where are the opportunities where we can work with private landowners to ensure that wildlife can continue to get across their properties, and then mitigate some of the busiest roads that's putting wildlife overpasses and underpasses in. So we've got the 2 ingredients I talked about, protected areas and corridors. And the third thing in this region is about communities who make decisions to support nature. And this might be around managing recreation, like in this photo, making decisions about how much their communities sprawl out into potential corridors, and practicing coexistence. So this bear dumpster is impossible for wildlife to get into. And it might be working at a rural level. So this is a range rider. By putting people out with cattle, they're less likely to get munched on by large carnivores. And even in the town of Canmore, they have signs like this, like, keep your dog on a leash, otherwise it might be a cougar snack. So really thinking about how animals can coexist. In my town of Canmore, 2 springs ago, the snow was super deep. We had 12 grizzly bears in a town of 14,000 people for 2 weeks. No grizzly bears got hurt, no people got hurt because they've taught this community how to coexist. The other thing that Y2Y does is we try to work to not only to move the frame of conservation from protected areas to large landscapes. So this show is the West Wing show for some of you who've been around for a while. Grey's Anatomy has Y2Y in there. National Geographic did a whole magazine just on Yellowstone to Yukon, and many more examples in here. Our hope is to be a model for how we can essentially reverse the decline of biodiversity around the world. And we do. We think we're a landscape of hope. We've increased protected areas by over 80% so far, so we're 18% protected. The size of protected areas has grown, which is really important for these large-ranging critters. We have more highway wildlife crossing structures. Like I said, it's even more than 117 now. And we've seen grizzly bears in the United States actually recovering. So what do we need going forward? And this is where the other speakers are going to dive in. We continue to need evidence. So this is the very first federally designated wildlife corridor in the United States. It's called Path of the Pronghorn. It's actually a 150-mile one-way trip of these pronghorn that go in and out of Grand Teton National Park. In some places, it's a really narrow crossing structure, or they had to cross this road, which became a wildlife overpass. And literally one fence could end this incredible phenomena and a species in one of our national parks. And so understanding what their needs are, where they're moving is so important for then taking action to make sure that we conserve it for the long term so that this place can continue to be the wildest mountain region in the world and maintain all of its different species and their processes, including migration. So we're super thrilled to be able to work with Movebank and be collecting all of this different information for science today and science in the future. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
All right, hi everyone. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what the project, so Gil and Roland and I have been partnering with Jodi for a few years now on this question of how can we help wildlife managers make room for animals to roam. So the three of us work with researchers around the world that track animals using animal-borne tags or biologgers for all kinds of different purposes, and amazing research is coming out of this. But our question here is really how can we make this flow from data being collected to policy and conservation outcomes faster and more effective? And so with support from NASA's Ecological Forecasting Program, we are working with partners like Jodi and other NGOs and government agencies across the Y2Y region on this project, which is building capacity that leverages this amazing existing partner network that they have with a shared data infrastructure. And so I'll be walking you through the goals of this project. The first goal is to build an archive of animal tracking data across the Y2Y. And so what does this look like? First, we want a collection of partner-owned data sets, so a collection rather than one big blob of data. The second is for it to support public discovery, data discovery, finding out what's in my area, who's working here. Third is that it can offer both public or also restricted access to those original data. Fourth is that it offers ways for us together or individually partners to promote collaboration and outreach. And finally, for it to enable new possibilities for working together on really working with the data. And so to do this, we're using an existing infrastructure called Movebank, which meets all these requirements. So Movebank is a global platform used by thousands of researchers around the world to manage animal tracking data. And so since we started around 2012, that's when we started collecting the numbers. We've been growing very fast, especially when you look at the numbers of animal locations. So we've just blown past 6 billion locations at the end of last year. These describe the movements and behaviors of about 1,400 species of animals, and the data themselves are stored in about 8,500 user-managed studies. And another important piece here is that there are over 20,000 tags that are sending data in near real time that are going straight into people's projects in Movebank as they're being collected. The second goal is to identify analysis needs in the region. And so what does that mean? So we're working directly with partners and looking for what are their needs in working with these data in terms of data management, data analysis, and decision-making across the region. And so we're doing this through a combination of remote meetings and then in-person workshops. And an exciting thing here is we found quite a lot of overlap in the needs across these different partners, working with lots of different types of data. And so I will walk through, highlight several of these in relation to our third goal, which is to develop new analytical tools. And so we have Movebank, where we have a shared database and we have a shared way of controlling who has access to which data. And then we have APIs. So this gives us lots of options for moving data in and out of that database. And so what we're doing here is focusing on this piece down here, open source software tools that can work with any data that are in this archive. And so the core of this is being developed on the latest addition to our suite of services on Movebank, which is called MoveApps. And so this is an online platform that allows users to build and share analysis workflows by composing them out of user-developed apps, so kind of analysis modules. So some key pieces of this are, first, you don't need to dig into code to use this. So it's user-friendly. You can come on and piece together these analysis tools without needing to download code or see everything going on behind the scenes. However, if you're developing state-of-the-art tools, you can publish and create apps on MoveApps. So for here we see a kind of profile page of an app, and you'll see that at the bottom of every one of these, it'll link you out to a GitHub repository, which has the source code for that app. The apps can be written in R or Python. And then as you're using these, we guide users in how to cite and share the use of these apps as they're working with them. And finally, this is running in the cloud, and what this means is that some advantages here are it's one, running on a web browser. You don't need to download and install and update software. Second, you don't need to have a lot of local data storage, network connectivity, or processing power on your own local computer to use it. And then third, it creates options for automating processes and scheduling runs of workflows when you're not necessarily at your computer. And so taken together with the capabilities of Movebank, this gives us opportunities for doing near real-time analysis. So in this example here, African vultures being monitored by the North Carolina Zoo are at risk of being poisoned when they feed on carcasses that have been laced with pesticides. Now, park staff can potentially prevent this if they can detect feeding events ahead of time and get to those birds. And so in this example, they've been able to considerably speed up this process. What they're doing is they feed the data into Movebank, and then each day they have a scheduled analysis run that grabs recent data, and it looks for locations where the GPS points of multiple birds are clustering in the same place. And then the output of that is sent as an email to the park rangers who receive this in the morning when they arrive at work. So now what I want to do is present some of these shared needs we've found from our partners in the Y2Y region, and then talk about the solutions that we're working on. So the first need identified is monitoring animals in near real time. And so most of our partners have animals that are collared or tagged out in the field right now, and they want to be able to kind of see what's going on as these data are being collected. So here's a very, very simple workflow where we just grab data. We can say the most recent week or the most recent day of data, and then there's this customizable morning report that you can that can show recent movements, some basic movement statistics, and you can also, if you've got other sensors on those tags, see graphs of recent measurements from those sensors, and so this can help you quickly detect things like the start of migration or potential mortality. Second example is identifying carcass sites. So this is used in projects looking at predator-prey dynamics or feeding behavior. So in this example, we first get data from Movebank. Then we do a quick assessment of summary statistics of each of those tracks. And then we filter it. We filter out only locations with low movement speeds. And then we run this predation cluster detection app. And what I want to show you here is in this app is a feature of any of these apps, which is that you can provide you can provide settings, like user-provided settings, which then are used in running the analysis. So in this example, the user's asked to provide a geographic spatial area, radius, time duration, and a number of locations to use in defining what the cluster is for their data. And then as another example, once any of these apps completes, they will give you different output, and the developer can decide what kinds of output to give you. And so in this is kind of a typical example where one of the outputs is a map showing the tracks with little red dots for each of those cluster locations that it has identified, and then there's also like a table that you can download as well. So another example, many of our partners have collared elk, caribou, moose, and other ungulates or hoofed animals that they have been tracking for currently and even going back decades. And so one big question they have is around the timing and location of when those animals are giving birth, for example, to understand changes over time. And so in this example, we get our data from Movebank. We filter it for only females and only the calving period. And then we run this parturition analysis. And so the way you can often identify a calving event from GPS data are, first, if you look at the right-hand graph, so the green shading, that's the calving event that it's identified. They often make a big movement to a calving site. And so you see just to the left, just before that calving event, it's made this big displacement movement. It's gone a longer distance than usual. And then when the calf is born, they are stuck there with the calf for a few days before that calf is able to travel with them. So you see a marked drop in the movement speed, which you see over on the left graph. So another need that we came across over and over again was for dynamic custom animations. We want to animate our data, but we also want to show some environmental information in the background. We want to show some infrastructure layers. We have these other layers we really need to show on this map, and other animation softwares were not kind of giving this to them. So here we've developed a suite of tools called EcoData for building out these custom movies. And so the main purposes here are, one, to explore movements in relation to environmental context. So in this case, these are golden eagles from a long-term tracking study from the Teton Raptor Center. And they were interested in we would just like to see these migrations and how they relate to snow cover. And so this was the movie that we've made from that. The second really key reason for having these kind of movies is for communicating with stakeholders. And they've told us over and over again, if we can have a powerful animation and we go to a community, or we go to a developer, or we go to a decision maker, and we can show them an animation that illustrates the point we're trying to make, that can be more powerful than anything else we can do with the data. And then finally, when you're building these kind of movies, there's a lot of kind of tedious and difficult work in processing large geospatial data files. And so this suite of tools also includes a bunch of applications for easily manipulating those files for input to the movies. And then the final example is roads. And you've heard Jodi and Gil talk about this already, but roads and human infrastructure are a huge deal when we're looking at wildlife ability to move big distances. And so what I want to point out here is that we're able to put together all these pieces. So we have the data coming from Movebank, we have it going through MoveApps, and in this movie down here, if you see the little red dots, those appear every time these elk cross the road. And that's actually, so we're actually inputting the results of the MoveApps analysis into our animation here. So the fourth and final goal of the project is to expand our coalition across the Yellowstone to Yukon region. And so what does this look like? First, we're connecting into this existing Y2Y network. And so if you look here, our first workshop in Whitehorse, Yukon, From 2022, from that workshop to our second one outside of Yellowstone in 2023, we had about 12 additional groups as a part of that in-person workshop that we connected with through the first year of the project. So as we're growing this out, we're offering joint training and analysis to this growing group. And then because the process, this development process is very iterative, it's very responsive, it's easy for people to come in and give us feedback on any of these solutions I presented here, and then we can keep building on those and responding to that feedback as it comes in. So it's easy to bring in new people. And then finally, because we're using global open infrastructures for all of this work, all the tools we're building are things that we can share with people worldwide. And so next, Roland is going to talk more about how these tools fit into a bigger picture of conservation technology and an internet of animals.
Great. Well, thanks. What a great introduction to follow on from those two talks and from Gil as well. And so I'm going to kind of take us out from starting with this real focus on tracking data and especially on Yellowstone, and look at how this fits into some of the bigger picture. And so we're talking about big data for conservation, right? And a lot of it is animal tracking data, and this is what Sarah was really talking about. And I've got kind of some blobs up here showing that Movebank is the largest repository for tracking data, but there are some other repositories there as well. And then another kind of data that I work with a lot is is camera trapping data. And so these are places where people have run cameras and get wildlife pictures, working especially with Wildlife Insights, but there is also some other databases out there as well. So these are some examples of kind of where we're going with ecology big data. And just a quick little, if you don't know about Wildlife Insights, it's a great tool for working with camera trapping data. It's done in collaboration with a bunch of different groups that you see listed in the bottom, and Google helps with the AI. Sarah Beery has done some help with that on the AI side, so there is AI to help process the data. It's another project that's grown really quickly over the last couple of years. It has data from all around the world. Some of it's available to you, some of it you have to get permission to download, it depends. The AI is getting better and better. I think there's a new model about to be built, but can you guys find the deer in here? It's gotten to the point now where if it tells me there's a deer in there, I stop and look, and there it is. It's hiding in there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's getting pretty good. So anyway, so that's our examples of animal tracking and camera trapping. But Mark Mikulski, who I work with on a lot of these projects, and I were sort of thinking, well, what else is out there? We'd seen diagrams of this. You've probably seen this kind of thing showing, what is the internet? And so we thought, well, what is the internet of animals? And there are, so we kind of made a list of what are the other databases that are out there that we can access. And a lot of that, there's a lot of other observational databases that have museum data, iNaturalist data, eBird data. I think we're going to hear about a little bit more later. And those are also, many of them are grouped together in something called GBIF, which is a global biodiversity information facility where you can get kind of a one-stop shopping for lots of these. But it's not just these records of observations. We also have other kinds of data out there about population sizes, conservation status, like the IUCN Red List, trait data that says, how much do they weigh, how big is their home range size, things like this. There's a whole suite of veterinary databases out there that track animal health, disease databases, genetic information about all these different animals. And then, of course, there's the taxonomy, which is like, what is a species? And this is a really important part because this is what links these different ones together, right? If you're going to take tracking data and combine it with with camera trapping data and know the body size and the endangered species status of this animal, you have to know the species name. And that works really, it's getting more and more settled down for mammals and birds in particular, but there's some other groups where taxonomy is still getting settled out. And so our motivation, as Sarah was saying, is really to take this sort of pipeline where you start with animals, and then you have data, and then you learn something from the data, and that becomes something that's useful for politicians and managers to have conservation action, and really speed up this process. Where can we, instead of like waiting for 4 or 5 years for a PhD student to run analyses and write everything up. Can we get this a lot faster? And that's what Sarah was really talking about. And so this is kind of part of the process of the Internet of Animals is not just having these data and having them linked. And nowadays we're linking them through something called APIs, which allow these different databases to talk to each other in automated ways. And so that's part of it, right? But this is also that a lot of this data is coming in live from sensing, whether it's tracking tags on animals, as Sarah's talking about, where about 3 million data points come in every day to Movebank, or camera traps, or a lot of it is citizen scientists, right, reporting their observations. And then the next step of that is having these analyses automated so that, as Sarah was showing, they can happen, if you know exactly what's coming in, you can define the analysis and having it run to get these results more efficiently. And here's some examples, right, of other groups that are doing this. This is an amazing project by the Cornell Lab and collaborators that are mapping migration. So every day, this is a good example of what we're calling the Internet of Animals. They get live data about migrating things in the air from weather data, from weather radar, right? So weather radar picks up clouds, but if it's a cloud of birds, it can also pick that up. And it can tell you right now how many birds are flying in the air. And they use that and combined with data from other types of data, birds plus weather, and with real-time analysis to predict what the migration is going to be like in a particular place, which is great for bird watchers, right? They love that. But it's also useful for cities that are trying to reduce the bird kills when birds fly into skyscrapers. So they'll turn off the lights of those skyscrapers during the peak of migration to reduce bird kill. So it's an example of where how this can lead to a real-time conservation benefit. And so these are some examples. Birdcast is also something called Whale Safe that does something similar for to try to reduce whale and ship collisions off the coast of California. So these are some specific use case scenarios, and then Move Apps, as Sarah just described to you, is an example of a platform that can do this kind of thing in real time and sort of customized, right? Okay, so that gives you a little bit of kind of what we're talking about the Internet of Animals having lots of data linked together with real-time analyses. So where is this getting us? What is the kind of vision for conservation? And I think that there's two really important things that we need to have, and I think Jodi introduced some of these in the beginning, but one is like, where do the animals actually live? And how are their populations doing? Are they trending up? Are they trending down? Showed some great examples with grizzly bears there. But we need this for every species, right? And we need it every year because things are changing really fast. The climate's changing, the roads are being built, the habitat's changing. So we need these for lots of species every year. And then we need to know something about the connectivity between these populations. How are they moving around? How can we keep their connectivity even when climate changes? So when you take all these and you dump them into an AI image generator, you get something like this, which I thought was kind of fun, right? So, and if you, I don't know if you guys have played with these AI image generators where you can just sort of put in. So I put in, here's my vision, and here's the scientist with his gloves and his binoculars, right? Which is kind of crazy. And if you look close, some of these animals don't even really have heads, but that's okay. It's not realistic, right? It's kind of a placeholder of what we're looking for. But the amazing thing is, this sounds really ambitious, but in some cases, this is already happening, right? The eBird just last year released trend data for populations of birds all across, well, not the whole world, but a lot of species across all of North America in this case. So this shows the house wren, which is doing great. In blue, it's trending upwards, and it's red, it's trending downwards. And so we're not particularly worried about the house wren going extinct, but there's lots of other species that we are. And now we can say, where do we know they're doing poorly, that they need more attention, and maybe start to figure out what are the causes of those declines. So we really, we're looking to start to do this kind of thing with other species. And for a lot of other species, we don't have as much data as the ornithologists have. And so I'm really interested in this approach of doing sort of proper data integration, where you're able to combine different data sets. And we're doing this now with North American mammals using our camera trap data plus iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a great platform where citizens can report photographs of animals. And so you can, and you can see from iNaturalist, there's a lot more data, right? But it's not as good as camera trap data. And so we can start to use the complementary nature of camera trap data gives us more information where we have that, whereas iNaturalist and museum data helps us fill in the gap. Okay, so I think in terms of these, looking at animal population sizes and trends, I think we can start to get there for lots of different species if we're combining some data sets in statistically robust ways. But we need these analytical pipelines built, and we also need people to release their data, right? A lot of people will hold on to their data. They don't want to make it public. They don't want to make it available for larger things. They still want to write their papers. And so that's still a challenge, right? But I think if they see that it will get used for these large-scale products that are maybe not going to compete with their own interest of what they wanted to publish their data, that hopefully they'll make it more and more available. Because we really need to know what's going on right now, not what's going on with some cameras that were run 5 years ago, and that's 5 years ago. So things have changed a lot since then. So next I want to talk a little bit about where I think this is going for connectivity between populations. For those, some of you are familiar with this kind of modeling, some of you might not be, but a lot of it is, a lot of these models assume that use sort of, it's called circuitscape is what a lot of them use, and it's basically modeling animals as electrons. And that's great. It makes cool maps, and it gets us a long way, I think, to seeing how can we connect up these different populations and where are they likely to move. But there's some new ways where we actually have enough data where we can model animals as animals instead of as electrons and really say, how does this particular species move? And how do they respond to roads? We saw that grizzly bear, right? That grizzly bear really wanted to cross that road, but it couldn't get across. But if we can model what types of habitats it uses and how it responds, then we can have agent-based model. We can have those agents moving around in real landscapes. And you guys have seen these kind of models before, because these are basically video games, right? Video games are agents that are programmed with certain rules of how they move, and they move through these landscapes. And this is what we need, I think, more and more for animal movement, where we derive these decision rules of how animals move, either with existing techniques, or I think there's a lot of potential maybe for AI. I don't know if Sarah Berry's going to talk about that, but using AI to even get better at deriving these decision rules and then having these animals move around. And we're just starting to get at these kinds of studies. This is a new paper from 2 years ago that was the first one that I've seen that really used this. And they derive the movement decision rules, and then they simulate the animals moving through these landscapes and current and future wolf habitat, just as this particular example. But we could be using this to look at, right, how do we restore areas? How do we decide where to put that overpass for that bear, right? We could simulate overpasses in different areas and then say which one would be the most successful for getting that bear across the road. So planning development, and then starting to think, okay, well now we need to connect the Y2Y area in a climate that's a lot different, with different kinds of forests and different kinds of challenges. So how would these animals respond to that? And this also fits into a lot of other efforts, and Gil's involved in some of these, and some other folks are as well. And this is an example of an effort by the European Union to develop a highly accurate digital model of Earth. And we probably, like climate models are this kind of thing for climate, right? And there's models of forests, how forests grow and mature and change. And we need to make sure we have animals in these models of how animals are moving around. And this is kind of this idea of a digital twin. That you have Earth, and you have a digital version of Earth that you can do these experiments. You can say, what if we put a mine here? Or what if we change the forest and restore the forest in this way? How will this affect forest? How will this affect carbon? We also need to know how this will affect the animals. And so this is where we're getting, I think, with the Internet of Animals. We have live data, linked data, automated analysis. And I'll just end with a couple ideas of where could this get us. Right now, we have this direct action conservation, right, with the turning the lights off on the buildings, and with the trying to avoid ships. Another idea for the future is that we can actually alert, because animals often detect poachers themselves and respond differently. And we could be using that information to determine where these poachers are in the park. And there's some people doing some experiments right now on this that's in Africa that's pretty cool. We can also count animals now with cameras, but think of all the doorbell cameras that are out there, all the backyard cameras. I don't need all those images, right? But it would be great to get the data we have AI on their camera saying that there was this species found in this time. And you could even do it from cars, right? All these cars are driving around with LiDAR and cameras looking out the side. They could be counting wildlife as they're going, and potentially even counting insects, because LiDAR can count insects. And right now, we don't have we don't have very good methods for tracking insect populations. Gil mentioned all the different sensors that animals can wear. Think of all the weather balloons that we're sending up into the atmosphere to measure the atmosphere. Birds are already doing that for us right now. We just need to connect that data, and we might even be able to start to detect earthquakes and volcanic eruptions before they happen. There's some hard concrete evidence that animals can sense these kinds of things before we can. We don't actually understand how they do it, but some goats on Mount Etna freak out 5 hours before an eruption. We don't know why, but we might be able to harness that to get early detection. And then finally, for disease monitoring, right, that we could have a more combined, coordinated disease monitoring schedule. So that's kind of the summary, that I think there's a lot of potential for these big data to help us track population sizes, look at their trends, figure out where we need the most attention, and what the causes of these problems are, and then also managing these connectivity between populations to maintain the connectivity between populations. So that's the end of my talk, and I think we're doing a little discussion panel here, so I'll step over here, and Sarah will come up, and we'll have time for questions. Thanks. Yep.
Welcome back, Jodi. So we have plenty of time for questions, so please just raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone right over to you.
Hello. My name is Nicole Jackson. My background is in environmental education and interpretation. So I had a question in regards to data collection as it relates to wildlife populations, all of that stuff, but how I'm also trying to connect it back to, I guess, climate change, also the displacement of people. How is that going to kind of be factored into combining all of this data and communicating it to people who aren't as familiar with the technology or the research, but also having to think about, even bigger layers in terms of, climate issues, whether it be earthquakes, tornadoes, flooding. I feel like we have to be just as cognizant of people just as much as the wildlife, but it's all full circle. So kind of, So just wanted to know if that's part of this data collection or at least long-term thinking.
Yeah, sure. I'll just start with that. So we're, mainstreaming, I think I like that term that Jodi mentioned, and we're definitely looking for those opportunities, right? How do we get our word out to the general public? And I'll give two examples. One is the maps and the animations. I think are really, really powerful communication tools. And so we look to, try to make some compelling maps. I think Sarah showed some great examples, and trying to think about the story and how can you communicate that with a map, or even better, with an animation. And the other is, I'll take this opportunity to plug my podcast. It's called Wild Animals, and it's stories about animals told by the people who study them. And so each one is an interview with an animal tracker that's followed one particular individual animal and sort of tells the story. Pluie the wolf is up there. We had a researcher who was studying Pluie the wolf tell the story of Pluie, and then so you learn about the tracking and about the animals and about that particular individual as well. And so that's another one of our efforts. And then I'll pass the mic. I don't know if Sarah or Jodi want to add to this discussion.
I'm thinking that Jodi might have some good insight on this interface. It's kind of a step in a different direction from what we're presenting today to environmental professionals, right? But that connection with communities and with in relation to what they're experiencing and what their questions are. So, Jodi.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a hard time hearing the question, but I think that the idea was how do we integrate this in with communities and sort of spread this knowledge? And I think there was also a little bit of a climate change lens there, which, and so, yeah, I think really the most effective way to communicate stories that will stick is to get to people's hearts. And so, stories like Pluie the wolf, stories like Bear 399, who, by the way, has had something like 20 children and grandchildren, and is the most watched bear in all of Jackson, just inspire the hearts and motivate people to make changes. So the county around Jackson Hole, Wyoming, actually finally put in bear smart trash cans to try to save that bear and all of her grandchildren into the future. So I think it really is about storytelling. And I think, these data, pertaining to climate change, these data can be collected today. And if we can look at how migrations are changing over time and through space, like with massive fires that are happening that have never happened at such a scale, and how they're actually shifting with human developments, that can tell a really important story and help us as human beings and as smaller communities to make decisions about where we might expand to or where we might choose not to.
Great, thank
Anything
you, Jodi.
else to add?
Real quick, I'm going to take a question from the YouTube live stream. Jens Owen asked the question, can CARE, that's the acronym CARE, can CARE principles be applied to data sharing needs?
What is CARE?
So I think that the CARE principles are a framework around indigenous data ownership. So I can't tell you a whole lot about it, but that's the basis. And I can say, like, for Movebank and for all the data that are part of the Y2Y project, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, right, as I put in that archive, one of the requirements is that data do not have to be made fully public. Either for, part of that's conservation, it's endangered, and the data are coming in real time. We don't want people to be able to see the current whereabouts of those animals. And part of it is where data are co-owned with indigenous communities, tribal governments, or where the data sharing is always, they're a part of making data sharing decisions. And so that's fully, our partners in Northwest Territories and Yukon are absolutely, this is very much integrated with their existing kind of data sharing pieces. So I hope that addresses that question a bit.
Hi there. My name's Amy Wald. I have a sustainability consultancy for hospitality and tourism organizations. So I'm curious how you're working with tourism organizations and DMOs to make this, really integrate into their framework, their outreach, and, working with them, partnering with them to utilize their resources as well.
So
Maybe I can take.
Yeah, go for
ahead,
it.
Gil.
no,
So we work a lot with, with different kinds of industries, including the tourism industry. We will give talks to at places where there are tourists, like the White Museum here in Banff, the Jackson Hole Wildlife Museum, to try to, again, build awareness. Well, there are some of these back road bicycles. They ask us to come give talks to their clients. And so it's part of an awareness raising strategy to ensure that they know. And also there are, massive tourism kind of entities that represent a lot of industries. And so we spend a fair amount of time talking with those industries, working to educate and do outreach to their communities. So it might even be like, mountain biking communities and letting them know what are the best practices for expanding mountain bike trails and how to minimize wildlife impact. Or it might be, other kind, the whitewater rafting industries, and talking with them about how to secure trash while they're in the backcountry. There's a lot of different people who come to this region, and absolutely how they're engaging with the region makes a difference. Anyone else want to?
Hi, my name is Nancy. I'm a sophomore from Davidson University. First of all, I would like to say thank you for all of your hard work and in terms of like exploring the intersection between data analytics and conservation. So I have two questions. First of all, about the protected areas as an initiative. I learned about this concept in my class at Davidson University, and in terms of protected areas going after the 30 by 30 initiative, there are some opinions that they're not really effective in terms of like how conservationists can really implement in their actions in those areas. So my question would be like, what actions are you implementing after you identify and recognize those protected areas? And then the second question would be for camera tracking methods at data analytics. So how would you avoid like inaccuracies and inaccuracies in terms of movement sensor because of all of the climate conditions, weather condition when you take a photo of the animals sensing. So
Great.
Thank you.
Jodi, you want to go first about protected areas?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the question was around protected areas and are they really effective and how do we help ensure they're effective? And so at a global basis, we have what I would call a really uneven application of protected areas. So maybe I should start off just defining what a protected area is. According to the globally agreed upon definition by all countries in the world, protected areas, their goal, where they're set up, is to protect biodiversity. And what we get in some countries that don't have capacities or have weak or corrupt governments is we get what we call paper parks. And those are parks that are drawn on a map, but in fact there's logging or wildlife killing and things like that inside of the parks. And so, I think that's something in the Y2Y region that's less of an issue than it is in other parts of the world. We're really fortunate both in the United States and Canada to be able to practice good governance. And in the case of Canada, they are often sharing the management of a national park with Indigenous peoples today. And so what that means is that they can have these guardian programs where they actually have a large number of Indigenous people who are out on the land in a way that the federal agency wouldn't be able to. And that helps to patrol the area and ensure that it's in good shape, that there's no invasive species, that people aren't poaching animals and that kind of thing. So I think protected areas here in Canada and in the US, where they're well placed, such that they're protecting key biodiversity, are very effective, especially if they're connected with ecological corridors. Over to you, Roland.
Yeah, so in terms of camera trapping, so camera traps are motion-sensitive cameras that you put out, and then as animals move by, it'll take pictures. And so I think the question was, how do you sort of standardize and make valid comparisons across it? So I would say there's two parts to that. One is we always set cameras in a standardized way, and so usually that means without bait. So you're just getting whatever's walking by at that particular place. Whatever's walking by, you get a record. And so we do some kind of systematic or randomized study design that allows us to put out a bunch of cameras here and a bunch of cameras over here, and then make a rigorous comparison between them. But the other thing that we're actually moving towards that will allow us to make even better comparisons is we started to realize that there's some differences in terms of how big of an area the camera can see. Right? And sometimes you set a camera out and it's a big open field and it can see, it'll trigger out to like 20 meters. Other times there's a bunch of bushes or it's really hilly and it only triggers to a smaller distance. And so we've been measuring some of those distances. So you could say, okay, well, this camera has a small search area and this camera has a big search area, and that might help explain why you only got a few animals on this camera and you got more animals on that camera. And that's been really a pain in the neck, right? Because you got to go out there with a measuring tape basically and take all these measurements. Well, AI is starting to come to the rescue on that now and allowing us to automate that step. which all of a sudden being able to do that in an automated sense for every animal and every camera opens up all sorts of new techniques to allow us to really have proper density estimates from camera traps for all kinds of species, not just these sort of relative abundance or occupancy measures.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Rose with the Ohio Wildlife Center. Dr. Kays, you mentioned that this technology can be used to find poachers. And I wondered what the implications are for all of this detailed data about animal locations and movements. What are the implications for that information being used by highly organized criminal wildlife trafficking rings that are very well funded, especially in areas like Central Africa where illegal trafficking is completely out of control?
Yeah, certainly. So that is kind of at the crux of this tension between let's make the data publicly available so it can get a lot of good scientific use versus let's not help the poachers do what they want to do, right? And so that is especially important for the live data, right? The older data, if they know that there was a tiger at a given camera 5 years ago, that's not as big of a deal because that tiger, that tiger's not there anymore. And so that's where we do, especially for the animal tracking data, which is particularly sensitive because it's live. We restrict that more, but I say we, like that's not on Movebank. That's on the public, the PI, the scientists, right? Because they know for their area, for their species, should I make this data public or not? Because a lot of times it's really beneficial. There's a lot of some cool bird migration studies where they make the data public and people will go out and see the birds and report back. And sometimes even they found them, like some of these storks get like tangled in infrastructure and get stuck, and they'll actually go rescue them and save them but because it's live. So it's very much a sort of local decision about whether this is a risk or not for a given species. And so we empower the scientists to make that decision.
And I want to point out that everything that we do in the collaborative databases is not around let's make all the data public. It's around let's create tools for controlled data sharing. And we don't own the data. Unlike the internet apps that whatever you click, it's theirs, we don't own the data. So whoever contributes data to Movebank retains the control over how the data is shared and with whom. And they can say, I don't want to share the data with no one. I don't want anyone to know that the data exists. That is fine. Or they can say, I'm willing, they can, in our Y2Y archive, for example, the requirement to join the archive is not that you share the data, but you share the method to request the data. So the user can click, okay, the data exists, click here, read the rules, how is data being shared? And there are government, so the Yukon government, Northwest Territory, they have their own procedures of requesting the data, and those procedures can be followed, and they can decide if they want to share the data with you or not. You can sunset the data. You can say anything older than X will go public. We give you the tools to both publish your data and control access.
I'll just add briefly
I would add to that. I think, sorry.
Go ahead, Jodi. Go ahead, Jodi.
Okay. One of the sad things that has happened historically is the data and data sets have essentially died when the researchers pass away. And there's so much data that's just sitting in people's computers, or even worse, in hard copy form. And they could be so valuable in a place like Y2Y if we had those data so that we could look at how animals are moving through time and space. At the same time, I'll tell you a story. There was a guy doing research in Montana on wolverines and in one particular mountain range. And he announced this, and it was in the newspaper. And the next week, a trapper came out and he trapped all of the wolverines in that mountain range because he knew where they were. He baited them and killed them. And so but at the same time, on the converse side, we often see scientists working with local ranchers to let them know when wolves are in certain parts of their leased land, their public land that they're leasing for for livestock, so that they can move those livestock away from potential conflicts. And so again, it's really case dependent. And I think it's so important that scientists can announce that they have a data set and they don't have to share it. If I wanted to get access to a data set, say on Movebank, some of them are publicly available because they're deemed not sensitive. Others, the researchers say you need to request it from me. So someone write to Roland and say, Roland, I really want your data from this place for a bigger study. Will you collaborate with me? And Roland can say, absolutely, I will. And then the data becomes available to that person, but it's not just always publicly accessible. And that's huge because often we don't know. It's so hard in this information age to know where the data are and who's studied what where.
I was just going to add one piece with the as we develop these analytical methods. So like on Move apps, one thing is that as we share our methods, we can do that without sharing data. So like that piece with that example with the African vultures. And doing, finding this clustering algorithm. So that workflow is public. Like the North Carolina Zoo helped to develop that, and they've made that workflow public on Move apps. But the access to the data are completely separated. So if they have shared that data with you, you can run it exactly as they're running it. But the idea is, hey, I want to apply that same method to my data and maybe change those settings a bit because of some differences in my case. So this way of sharing methods is also a way of helping people start to collaborate and talk with each other and build trust before necessarily sharing the data. So it's another way of kind of working with that interface.
And we have one final question.
Hi, my name's Reagan. I'm a student here at OSU, also a fellow Canadian, not from Canmore, though that's a lot prettier than where I'm from. But I guess you touched a little bit about this with the Y2Y project, but you have multiple different Indigenous communities and 2 different governments with Canada and the US. How did you get everybody on the same page, and did you have any difficulties just with private and public land, and how did you navigate those issues?
I mean, for us, it's been kind of easy because Jodi and groups in the Yellowstone to Yukon have already had this huge network, and so we've been able to kind of start with people that that we know or that we're easy to get in touch with, and then it kind of spreads out from there. Like, so then they like this trusted messenger, right? So they talk to someone else who then comes to us, or they suggest we reach out to them. And so it's this working together and being able to leverage this amazing network that's been built that has made this kind of it's kind of why we chose this region for our first time trying this type of a collaboration. Yeah.
And to point out, not everyone active in the region and working with Jodi work with us too. So part of our roles is expanding the network, and we do that. We have a core of people. So we contacted everyone. Some came back to us. Some were excited to participate and with us before we're ready, to help us understand what apps should be developed. Now that we already have developed apps that were built specifically for the needs of some of the organizations in the area that collaborate with us, we're doing workshops, we're giving demos, we're giving tutorials. So more and more of the active participants are signing in, say, yes, I have a related problem, I can see how that tool can be used, or I want to participate in the data collaboration. And we get more participants coming in and starting to use the tool.
Join me in thanking Gil, Jodi, Roland, and Sarah for their remarks today and the conversation. This has been absolutely fascinating to listen to, and it reminds me of just how far we've come over the course of my career. At the risk of revealing my age, we've about 30 years or so ago, we were trying to track fish populations along the East Coast, and about the only data that we really were able to collect was from the anglers themselves that we were trying to understand fish populations. So we would have to ask them how many fish that we're catching and try to extrapolate from that. Now we're at the point where we can track in real time these various populations. And what I'm really looking forward to is as we start to understand the social models and the data that we have from human populations, how we start to integrate those pieces together with these with the animal migration information and the tracking information, so that we can build better models for true sustainability. And so I'm really excited about the direction we're headed. One thing that, it's really impressive to see these data sets and how far we've come, but we're still in the infancy of all of this, and really trying to understand where all this data is going is really going to be important as we move forward. So for all the students out there, look into workshops, look into ways to really get a better grasp on how we use these data, because it's going to be the future of everything, and understanding these data and the models that we have moving forward. So thank you all for all the work you're doing, and thank you for your comments today. As is our EPN tradition, we want to recognize you each with a certificate of appreciation. Joe's going to help me here, and he's going to hand out those. Jodi will be sending you a digital copy of your certificate later today. We were kind of hoping Jodi would stay on the screen. The window in the background, we might get to see the sunrise with where she is. So before we take a break and transition to our next set of speakers for the in-person audience, please check out the details at the back of your program for upcoming EPN events. We return to breakfast programming next month on March 19th to continue our look at programs geographically centered in ecosystems that span American, Canadian, and First Nations boundaries. In this instance, the Great Lakes, and more specifically Lake Erie, or as many of us call it around here, Ohio's North Coast. This event will bring together the national level environmental management leaders of the Great Lakes from Canada and the United States to discuss invasive species, nutrient loading and harmful algal blooms, emerging and forever chemicals, alongside strategies to enhance coastal resilience, fisheries health, and more. It'll highlight how agencies work with communities, regional academic institutions, and the private sector to improve restoration and resiliency. Please check out the list of speakers on the screen. Our March program will, similar to today, feature an extended 2-hour professional training session for an in-person audience. Each of the speakers on the screen, as well as some of the other special guests, will have an additional 20 minutes to dive deep into their respective Lake Erie management domain for those attending here at the 4-H Center. The extended session of the program between 9:45 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. Will be worth 2 CEU and PDH hours administered by the Water Management Association of Ohio. Please reserve your spot for that program by signing up today, following the details listed on the screen. Save the date for our signature Earth Day event, which will occur at the Fawcett Center on Monday, April 22nd. This program will be at the center of a statewide celebration of Ohio's native plants for food. More event details coming soon, but for now, please reserve room on your calendar and your diet for what will be a splendid blend of learning, networking, and eating of the finest foods that Ohio's plants have to offer. Special guest appearances will be made by white oak acorns, hybrid chestnuts, native Ohio blueberries, and one of our most famous fruits, the pawpaw. Though there may be appearances by the villainous spotted lanternfly. So you don't miss out on the upcoming details and opportunities, we encourage you to become an EPN member today through a free and easy process at epn.osu.edu. Once an EPN member, you can post events, job openings, and receive announcements about forthcoming breakfast programs and other events happening in our region. If you haven't already done so, add your name to our list of over 2,300 EPN members to further connect, grow, and inspire with fellow environmental professionals and enthusiasts in the months ahead. Please check out the list of environmental professionals who've joined the EPN membership directory over the past 5 weeks. As we've alluded to earlier in the program and as outlined in the program agenda, we'll take a roughly 10-minute break, then begin a session right here on the use of computer vision camera traps and animal identification, facilitated by Dr. Sarah Beery with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. This will be followed by a session on the use of citizen science data to survey bird migrations, led by Dr. Sarah Supp a professor of data analytics at Davidson University. These programs are open to all and will start again here in this room in about 10 minutes. Please talk to Joe if you have any logistical questions. While you're making your way out the door or clearing off your table, please help us return the reusable scarlet-colored plate and cutlery toolkits with all pieces accounted for by scraping food off into the compost bin and returning these reusable dining materials to the bins located near the exits. If you're unsure on where to place your plates and utensils, then no worries, simply leave them at your table and we'll take care of the rest. Thank you again for joining us and have a nice remainder of your morning.
We got you, Jodi. We're going to take the photo in just 1 minute. Yep.